Welcome to the All Out Leadership Podcast, hosted by Pastor Eric Lawson, where each episode is uniquely designed to help you live all out by bringing you practical leadership from a biblical perspective delivered in 10 minutes or less. So whether you're a business leader, serving in ministry, or simply looking to grow in your leadership, this podcast is for you. Before we dive into this week's topic, make sure to subscribe to the podcast and download the show notes at ericlawson.com/podcast. And while you're at it, feel free to share the content on social media. Now, let's join Pastor Eric for this week's conversation.
Welcome to edition 3 of the All Out Leadership Podcast, where we are looking at Jesus dealing with the disease of FOMO. If you've missed any of the last 2 episodes on Jesus leadership dealing with FOMO, be sure to go back and listen to those. Also, I'm sure you all know somebody out there that needs to hear this, whether it's a leader or somebody who's dealing with FOMO, or it's a leader that's dealing with FOMO. Either way, send it to a friend. Pay it forward. I'm going to jump around into a couple different verses to answer the question, why doesn't God tell us everything? And really, this trickles down to answer the same question. Why doesn't my boss have to tell me everything? Acts chapter 1, verse 6, Jesus, really his last words as he's ascending up into heaven. Then they gathered around him and asked, "Lord, are you at this time going to restore the kingdom of Israel?" And he said to them, "It's not for you to know the times or dates the Father has set by his own authority." Wow. Tell that to the HR team and see how that goes. Tell that to the production team and tell them how it goes. Hey, it's not for you to necessarily know all the times and dates. Look, there's just going to be certain things that might not have been on the calendar and you didn't know. Whoop. Okay. I'm not saying you don't plan and you don't, but Jesus was a nightmare corporately for most any organization, and he's still God and he's still running the universe. Anyway, number 1, you don't need to know. There are times your leader doesn't tell you something. There's times God doesn't tell us something because he goes, you don't need to know. The reality is that going to make a difference inside of your life? There are facts you do need to know. There's information you need to do your job. And if you don't have those, it's your responsibility to go get those, to ask the right questions. Leaders ask questions. But there are some things you really don't need to know to do your job. You just want to know. You get a sense of value because I have information. Information's power. Again, that's the wrong heart. There's just going to be times you don't know because you don't need to know. Next, we see John 16, verse 12. I have much more to say to you, more than you can bear right now. There are times that God doesn't tell us everything because we're not ready to know. We couldn't bear it. Look, there are things in our organization as a church I haven't told certain staff members because they weren't emotionally, mentally, or maybe staffed, or they just weren't ready to handle that. And had they known what was coming down the pipe 12 months from now, it would have been too much for them to bear. They would have felt overwhelmed. They couldn't, focus on the now because they were overwhelmed by what would be taking place in the future. So there are just times as leaders, we have to make a leadership decision to go, it's the right information at the right time, delivered in the right way. And there are information that we have that not everybody else's has. Why? Because they're not always ready for that. Also, some of this is corrective. There's times that I see things inside of people's lives that I go, you know what? I'd love to speak into their life in that area, pastor them in that area, but you know what? They're not ready right now. And God does that with us. Man, aren't you glad that when you got saved, God didn't show you everything that was wrong with you? And you know what? God still hasn't shown you everything that's wrong with you. And I'm so grateful. Man, I look at the things Jesus dealt with me like early in my salvation, now they're just little minor peddly things. Back then they were like, oh my gosh, I got to stop like cussing at everybody that offends me. And, that was overwhelming to me. I got to stop doing drugs. I mean, like, oh my gosh, now God's actually dealing with really big things that are like heart things and attitude things and things that are rooted deep down inside of my character. And it's like, I'm so glad God didn't show me all the things he wanted to fix inside of my life. And he kind of just works on one area at a time. And, sometimes when you're leading your staff and you're leading your team, you as a leader, you see everything that's wrong. You see the 32 things you want to fix, but you're just going to kill and crush people. And God knew that. And so he didn't deal with every little thing. He said, hey, you're not ready right now, and I'll get to it when you're ready. And so maybe right now your leader hasn't told you everything because you're just not ready to handle it. And so that's okay. If you want to know more, then just get ready. All right, John chapter 6, verse 5. When Jesus looked up, he saw a great crowd coming to him, and he said, Philip, where shall we buy bread for these people to eat? And he asked this only to test him, for he already had in mind what he was going to do. Sometimes you don't have information because you're being tested. There's times that God's simply testing us to see how we're going to respond. There's times that God's just testing us to see, will we pass the test of faith, the test of trust, the test of obedience, whatever it is. There's times God allows us to be tested. Why? Because every test on the other side of it has promotion. God doesn't test us in a vindictive way. He tests us because he goes, hey, I want you to graduate. I want you to go to another level. I want to be able to give you more inside of your life. When you look back at your first grade, and I look back at first grade, you know what I got to do? I got to sweep in the hallways. And it was like, I loved it. Like I'd go out there in my break time, I would sweep and I would clean, and I was really good at it. My high C personality, which I didn't even know of such a thing back then, but it was manifesting at a young age. Like I was out there loving it. It was great. But you know what? Now that I'm 52, I'm getting to do things far beyond sweeping. I'm still sweeping. It's just different messes and different methods. All right. I'm just sweeping way bigger messes than I used to. And I get to do so much more that I was not ready for in first grade. But there were a bunch of tests I had to pass along the way for God to promote me to that next level. And every next level brought greater sense of fulfillment, greater sense of satisfaction. So look, if your leader hasn't told you everything, it might be that they're just simply testing you. If God hasn't told you everything, it might be that they're just simply testing you. How you respond really reveals a lot about you. All right, Acts chapter 20 and verse 22. And now, compelled by the Spirit, I'm going to Jerusalem, not knowing what will happen to me there. This is the Apostle Paul. And every time he was getting closer to Jerusalem, everybody would say, hey, Paul, don't go. We're being warned by the Spirit. Things are going to happen. But nobody knew exactly what was going to happen. Paul says, I don't even know what's going to happen. I don't really know what's awaiting me there. I have a sense, but I don't know the details. Sometimes your leader doesn't know everything, and that's why they haven't told you. There are just times we go, hey, you know what? God's leading us that way. Yeah, but we need the details. We need the 5-year roadmap. Well, we don't have that. God didn't give us to it. So God just simply said that way. And there are just certain things you'll see that God gives you one step at a time. We got to be faithful with that step. We can plan, we can do our best, we can anticipate, but there are just times we don't have facts, we don't have details, and sometimes you have to lead. I like what one leader said. Sometimes leadership is making decisions with 75% of the facts. In fact, if you as a leader can learn to make effective decisions with just 75% of the facts, you're going to be able to be more effective and efficient, because you're never going to have 100% of the facts. When you have 100% of the facts, they were yesterday's facts, and it's too late to make that decision now, because all those facts you want are in the rearview mirror. So you're going to have some facts, you have to make decisions, you have to lead. So we're leading without all the facts, we're leading without all the information, and we just simply go, God's leading us that way, our company's going that way, we're going towards that goal, that objective, that OKR. These are KPIs we're aiming for, but we don't have all the details. So look, Jesus is the only leader that ever had all the facts, but he didn't even still give all of his team those facts. So just be okay and give your leader some grace, give your leader some margin if they don't have all the facts. A great leader is not the one who knows everything. In fact, if your leader acts like they know everything and they have all the answers, that's a dangerous leader, and that's actually a scary leader, because that's an arrogant leader. I'd rather follow an honest leader who simply goes, you know what, guys? God said we're going that way. I don't have all the details, but we walk by faith. We're going to do the best we can to plan, to prepare, to be ready. But we're also going to be flexible to adjust as God shows us next steps. All right, there you go. How Jesus dealt with the disease of FOMO.
Thank you for joining us on the All Out Leadership Podcast. We hope you gained new biblical insight that challenged you to grow in your leadership. If you've enjoyed this week's episode, we would love your help in getting the content out farther. You can help by subscribing to the podcast at ericlawson.com/podcast and telling others about it. Next week, Pastor Eric will be back with another episode. So until then, we hope you have a great week being an all-out leader.